Peace, Hotep, Alafia. This is your sister, Dr. Maat, coming before you again with a powerful discussion with our Baba, Professor James Small. Happy Juneteenth, family. And Baba, thank you so much for coming on the show again to give us your wisdom and knowledge. How are you today, Baba?
Well, I'm fine, but happy Juneteenth to you and the audience. And we're going to talk about Juneteenth and its specialness. But I'm going to start by opening. It was not the first celebration of emancipation.
Oh, I didn't know that, Baba.
I know. And it only has caught on in the last decade. But it had been celebrated in Texas since 1865. But we'll get there.
Okay, so Baba, let's get there, Baba. Let's jump right into it. There are a lot of folks who are just learning. Some people already know about Juneteenth, and some people are really just coming into this information. So for those who know about it, this will be a review for you. And for those who don't know, this will be a learning experience, a good learning experience for you. So Baba, let's jump right on in. Can you explain to the viewers or the listeners, what is Juneteenth? Kind of walk us through that history.
Okay, in 1865, this general named Granger, well, Texas was still in rebellion, even though the Emancipation Proclamation was passed in 1863, January 1. And the war, Lincoln had already been assassinated. Richmond, Virginia, the Confederacy capital, had already fallen. Lee and all these guys had already at that point been arrested. But after the Federal Army defeated Mississippi and New Orleans, the slaveholders took over 150,000 people from the New Orleans area and the Mississippi area into Texas, because Texas was still in rebellion. So Texas is the last territory that was rebelling in the Civil War. And they carried on their rebellion for more than 2 years. Okay, after slavery ended, after the Emancipation Proclamation. And so this general, his name is Granger, was dispatched to Texas to let the Black folks know y'all's free, and let the white folks know slavery is over. But let me see if I can find it. I want to read what his, they always talk about his order number 3.
And Baba, I have the order. Do you want me to put it up on the screen so we can show the people?
Put it up on the screen so people can see it.
Okay.
Because even though you're saying the people are free, you're telling them to stay on the plantations where you are, because we ain't going to take care of you.
Exactly. So, Baba, I'm going to let me know if you see my screen, Baba.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so to the left, that is General Granger. The general that Baba was just speaking of, and to the right, this is what the original or a facsimile of the original General Order number 8. And so this is what you're talking about right here, Baba. Let me go.
The people are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection, therefore, existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. See, that was the catch right there, right? This now becomes the beginning of sharecropping. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They're informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. And Texas immediately passed the vagrancy laws, the first vagrancy laws in America. So anyone that was caught away from the plantation, didn't have a job, then you would be arrested and then leased back to the plantation. So even though we celebrate Juneteenth at the end of slavery, if you look at that, slavery didn't really end, okay? But before Juneteenth in 1863, when Lincoln passed the proclamation, Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, the first celebration was in Beaufort, South Carolina, and it was called Jubilee Day, okay? On the very night that he signed the proclamation, thousands of Blacks came from all over South Carolina and Georgia and gathered at this one plantation and celebrated January 1st as Jubilee Day, It later became Emancipation Day. When I was a child, we celebrated in South Carolina, and we had parades celebrating January 1 as Emancipation Day. I didn't learn about Juneteenth until I was about 30-something years old. Because it was mainly in the Texas area that was being celebrated. They did start celebrating Juneteenth in 1866. But Jubilee Day and Emancipation Day was being celebrated in other parts of the South, especially on the Eastern Seaboard, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, as January 1 for a couple of years. So
didn't know that, Baba.
It is important for us not to have missed history.
Right.
And Juneteenth became popular across the country maybe for about a decade now, because it's catchy. Juneteenth. Hey, who would? At first I rejected it because I said it's historically inaccurate, but it's also historically apropos because even though slavery had legally been ended with Lincoln's executive order, because the Emancipation Proclamation was not a law, it was an executive order from the president. And so, but slavery itself was not ended because we still had Texas that held out for 2 years without even letting the people know there was an Emancipation Proclamation, without letting them know Lincoln had been assassinated, without letting them know the Confederacy had fallen and Richmond had fallen and Jefferson Davis was no longer. All these things that happened before June 19th, which becomes Juneteenth. And even though we accept June 19th, the exact date when people were given is not known. They just know it was in June, so that's why they say Juneteenth. What? So we're just gonna capture it. And this all happens in Galveston, Texas, which was, one of the major slave ports in America, one of the biggest cotton export ports in America, and where tens of thousands of us lived and worked in the Galveston area as enslaved people. So that's why Granger made his announcement there.
And so Baba, I had read that they said by 1865 there were an estimate of 250,000 slaves in Texas at that time. I also read that General Gordon Granger, they said he rode into Texas or Galveston, they called it Galveston Island, with 2,000 federal troops. He came in on the 18th of June, and then he got up on June the 19th that morning and made the announcement. Baba, let me ask you a quick question. Why do you think, I know you did mention that the news was delayed because Texas rebelled against federal orders. But I also heard that the news of freedom was deliberately withheld by enslaved to maintain free labor force on the plantation. So I heard that they wanted to, so they wanted to do that. And I also read that federal troops actually waited for slave owners to reap the benefits of their last cotton harvest before they went to Texas to, so it is true. Okay.
All that is true.
Okay.
And when you listen to the Granger order number 3, even though he says you're free and you've got all the rights, but then he says your relationship will now be worker and wage, and employer and employee. But he doesn't do anything to enforce that. You know what I'm saying? So these same people who were enslaved 5 minutes before he gave the order is still on the same plantation, still working for the same crackers, under the same conditions, with no guarantee they're going to be given a salary.
And so, Baba, what does Juneteenth symbolize for us? I know some people say that it's freedom. I've heard people on the internet say they call it free-ish because they say, well, we weren't really free because, as you stated, Baba, as soon after this news came through, they instituted the sharecropping system. Shortly after that, vagrancy laws. So some people say, it wasn't really a symbol of freedom, and then some people say we were free-ish. They keep putting the free-ish on it.
What it symbolizes is we're the last territory in the United States of America that held people in slavery under a Confederate legalism. But it wasn't just the Confederacy that made slavery legal. It was the Constitution of the United States, enforced by the Supreme Court of the United States. All of this, before the Confederacy existed, slavery was free. was considered to be legal in America. And you had the Dred Scott decision, that said black men have no right that a white man is bound to respect. And if a slave escapes, you can capture him and take him back to his owner. And all of this was supported by the Supreme Court of the United States and the federal government of the United States. So slavery was legalized not only by state governments, but by the federal government of the United States, and the judiciary of the United States supported that position. Actually, slavery functioned under the Confederate flag, and that flag we see, by the way, the X thing with the stars, that's not the Confederate flag. That's Lee's Tennessee battle flag. The Confederate flag was 3 broad stripes. I think it was white, blue, and red. And they rarely show any pictures of the Confederate flag. That flag we've seen is not the Confederate flag. That was a flag a general carried into battle. All the generals had their own war banner, and that was one of the war banners. I guess they thought it looked cute, so they chose that one. But the point is, slavery, for 90% of its history, 95% of its history, existed under the British Jack and the red, white, and blue American flag. So I always kind of laugh when we want to burn up the Confederate flag, which only flew for 3 years. But we weren't in slavery for 3 years. So whose flag flew over us all of the rest of that time? It was the red, white, and blue American flag from 1776 or 7. And from 600 years prior to that, it was the British flag.
It was the British flag. That's true, Baba. So Baba, the Juneteenth flag that was created by, it says Boston Ben Heath. It said he created this flag in 1997 and 2000. And is that the flag, Baba, you were just talking about? You said people thought it was the Confederate flag?
No,
Okay.
I'm saying there was a Confederate flag, which is 3 broad stripes running horizontally, red, white, and blue. Okay? That flag we see with the X on it, with the stars, that was a battle flag, a flag that the general carried into war. It was not the flag of the Confederacy.
Oh, okay.
It's a misnomer to say that is a Confederate flag, because it's not. It was a Confederate battle flag. It was not the flag over the Confederate States.
Okay, Baba, let me share my screen with you.
Let's come to this Juneteenth peace flag thing first. First of all, the red, black, and green is our flag. And the Negroes that want to create, that's the Texas, but I mean, the Juneteenth flag, as far as I'm concerned, we got a flag.
Come on, Baba. That's right.
And it's red, black, and green. And it's one of the oldest flags in America. There's only 2 countries in Africa that has a flag older than the red, black, and green, and that is Liberia and Ethiopia. Okay? We have the 3rd oldest African national flag in the world, and our flag is older than most nations in the Caribbean, older than most nations in the Caribbean, because none of them had gotten free from colonialism at the time of the Honorable Messiah Marcus Garvey, who brought us the red, black, and green.
Okay. He brought us by with the red, black, and green. That was 1923, right?
About
1920.
And I always say Marcus Garvey, but Marcus Garvey didn't bring us the flag. There was an organization called the UNIA, and that organization was made up of 90% African-American men and women. And most of those men and women had been a part of the Booker T. Washington Tuskegee organization, because Booker Washington invited Garvey here, and Booker died before Garvey got here. So much of his people joined Garvey. There was an organization called the Niagara Movement. The remnants of that movie joined Garvey. There was an organization called the Afro-American League, T. Thomas Fortune. They joined Marcus Garvey and the UNIA. They weren't joining Garvey, they were joining the UNIA. And they selected Garvey, elected him as their chair for good reasons. He was a very brilliant African man with a vision of insight. And it's like the myth, and that's why we got to be careful. When we do history, we don't have to do myth, because we have a strong history. Garvey was not the father of the Back to Africa movement. That's a myth. If you want to give that title to anybody, you got to give it to Martin Delany, okay, who decades earlier went to Africa, to Nigeria, where his grandfather was from, to Abeokuta, they formed an organization called the Niger Valley something something. But he came back to take all of us back to Africa, but it didn't work. So he became one of the leading proponents of saying, okay, if we can't get to the Niger Valley land that was given to us by the people of Nigeria and that area, what is now Nigeria, then I will go and help lead the movement back to Liberia. You know, and he probably was responsible for more people leaving to go to Liberia than anybody else. So we need to get all of this straight. And even before Garvey came here, Booker T. Washington, then I'll leave this alone. We'll come back to Juneteenth. But these things are all apropos when we understand them, put them in context. Booker T. Washington had set up a whole system in Togo, right, to produce cotton so that the people could help themselves. But the Germans tried to take it over. So Booker pulled the operation back out. People say, oh, he was helping the Germans. No, he wasn't. He was trying to give the Africans a way to take advantage of the knowledge they had learned through Dr. Carper at Tuskegee to build their own economy. When the Germans tried to take control of the agricultural sector, Booker pulled his program back out. And it was Booker Washington who invited Mr. Garvey to come here with his ideas. And so we come back to Juneteenth. It's just, I said all of that because history and context is important. When you operate on false history and fantasy and non-reality, then you're going to end up making the same misstep you said you were trying not to make. So back to Juneteenth, the 19th of June, when Granger makes his announcement and he gives his order number 3, and effectively, in terms of legal terms and slavery, by the edict of the federal government of the United States in Texas. These people who had escaped or who had now found their freedom, because all of them didn't stay on the plantation, many of them left and went to other parts of Texas to try to build lives of their own. So they did indeed got the first recognized Black holiday in the country. Juneteenth was the first holiday that was recognized. I forgot what city in Texas, but they did recognize it as a holiday, as a celebration. But across the rest of the Eastern Seaboard, people were celebrating January 1 as Emancipation Day. And so both Juneteenth and January 1 is good days, because people all over the world celebrate whatever day they got emancipated, whether the freedom was total or partial. When you got to the point to where you can start self-determining, and the laws, the international protocols said that you're free to self-determine, that's your Emancipation Day. So I go to Trinidad. I used to go to Trinidad every year to celebrate with the people of Trinidad Emancipation Day. I go to Ghana to celebrate Emancipation Day. I've been to Jamaica to celebrate Emancipation Day, and nobody said there's something wrong with that. Only when the African Americans want to make a claim to a point in history where they felt we are all now at least legally free, then we're not supposed to celebrate it. There's some joke about it. No, Juneteenth was not a joke. It was a time that our people was told by the federal government of the United States, backed by the military of the United States, you are now free with the same rights that the white folks got. That is indeed emancipation when you think of the conditions under which we were living prior, chattel slavery, the day before June 19th.
Baba, yes, sir. Baba, I was just thinking, why is that, that when the African American, and I know I'm gonna bring you back so we can really go into depth on but why is it that when the African American claims or lay claims to identity, or we feel like we're owed something and we fight for it, or we want to create holidays, why do you think we get that pushback? Because as you so eloquently said, Baba, you don't hear this pushback with other African ethnicities or even the Caribbean folks. It's only the African American, Baba. So can you talk about that?
We're the most powerful African community in the world not to be a nation state. We're the wealthiest. Last 5 to 6 years, we spent over $1 trillion into this economy. That is more than any Caribbean nation or any African nation has as disposable capital. Mm-hmm. We are the most widely educated in terms of modern education, quote unquote, administrative and technical and medical and so forth, of any African population in the world. Okay. Someone said, oh, well, you know, we have this many Nigerian doctors in America. Yeah, but we have Howard, we have Mahari, we have Spelman, we have Bethune-Cookman. No other community in America have this many educational facilities dedicated just to themselves, and we are in all the white facilities across the nation. So people like to play us in corner by talking about the junkie on the street corner and the brother that got arrested and sent to Rikers Island, and try to use their status to represent the image of Black Americans. Most Black Americans have never been to prison, will never go to prison, have never used drugs, will never sell drugs. Most Black Americans finish high school, and a significant number of that finish college. We are in all strata of American government and American corporations because this is our country. And so any immigrant groups, be white, brown, Black, yellow, they coming in as a minority element, and they're looking to occupy the space we occupy. So because that's the space that's available for occupation. You understand? Because they're not going to occupy the space white folks occupy. So they're occupying the space that we occupy. And that's where some of that contention comes from, that we will side with the white folks in how we define you, and we will reject your definitions of yourself. 3% of Black folks is involved in crime. Almost that 4% of white folks is involved in crime, but you don't identify the white folks by that 3% or 4%.
No.
Okay? But everybody try to do that with Black folks. You know, they're saying, oh, y'all just wear your pants off your behind. How many Black people do that? You know, that number is in the poorest of our communities with the most oppressed people. And that is a symbol of their rejection of the social order by in your face. It ain't just wearing a pants down. It ain't just about wearing, that's saying kiss my ass because that's the way you treat me. Okay? And so we need to deal with what's real. That is a protest gesture, the wearing of that pants. That I will not be a symbol of your social order if I'm not accepted as a part of that social order. Yet most Black people have jobs. If we didn't have jobs, where would we get the $1 trillion to spend? And or businesses. And so people are afraid. We're the third or fourth largest African population in the world. I think Nigeria is the first, Brazil is the second, and maybe there's one other, I don't know whether it's Kenya or Tanzania, but we are certainly no more than the fourth largest African contiguous population in the world. We are the wealthiest ones. No matter how we got that wealth, we are the wealthiest African nation in the world. Yes, the Africans got a lot of wealth in the ground on the continent, that's true. That is our wealth too. But that wealth is in the hands of the colonizers and the imperialists and the oppressors for the most part, and is not servicing our people. So they don't have that in their hands. But we have $1 trillion in our hands. We're the richest Negro in the world. Okay? So all of those things, there's a lot of envy, a lot of jealousy, but there's a lot of just jockeying for survival. And the only chess piece on the political chessboard and economic chessboard that could be moved by the immigrant population is us. Because they can't move the white folks from the chessboard. So we're the ones on the chessboard that could be moved, and we're the most vulnerable because we don't have cover of law as a national citizen of the nation state called the United States of America. And so it's easy to come into our community and open businesses and be able to get money from the banks that would not give me the money. And said, I need a credit record, I need a paper trail, and you've been in the country 6 months, no credit record, no paper trail, and you can get a loan to open a business and stock your stores. Or the people who run the wholesale business in America, who are mainly white in our communities, they're able to stock you on consignment where they would never consider stocking me on consignment to run a business. So there's a whole lot of stuff working against us that we need to know, but there's a whole lot of stuff working for us. Like I said, we spent $1 trillion last year, the year before, the year before, the year before. We spent that trillion because we made that trillion. So how dare anybody say we're lazy? How dare anybody say we don't work? Go to our communities. Yes, you can go to Harlem and you can find some bad streets, but you can go to Harlem and find mansions called brownstones, because I had one that I sold before I moved to New Rochelle. You can come up here to New Rochelle. I live in Rochelle Park. There's 75 homes in Rochelle Park. Out of the 75 homes, 60 of them are African-American owned homes. It's one of the most upscale element of Rochelle Park. And that's true across the nation, where our middle class and upper class live. But nobody wants to define us by our middle and upper class. They want to define us by our lower class and use that as an analogy for why they treat us in the manner they do. And what we have to do is come to the whole question of our identity. If you can be an enslaved African from the continent, brought to Jamaica, and when slavery is over and you get emancipated, you can be Jamaican, and that's cool. You can be an enslaved African, come from the continent, and go to Haiti, and when you liberate yourself, you can be Haitian, that's cool. But the African Americans aren't supposed to give themselves an identity when we're liberated. And that's why the question about liberation is always gray and fuzzy. People go like, we ain't really free. We're as free as any other person on the planet Earth. What do we do with that freedom is the cause to question. And one of the biggest thing in that freedom is the concept of identity. I read something the other day by Amenhotep. Yes, Amenhotep, Ankh from Kemet. I know I love him, that's my son. And he wrote this whole piece, I don't remember the whole thing, but he was saying he had 3 points to show that we didn't know what freedom really was. And his last point, he said, true freedom is to be bound to your identity. Okay.
Baba, you have to send that to me, Baba.
I'm gonna send it to you when we get up. To be bound to your identity as one of the things. And so Juneteenth symbolizes a moment in time where we should celebrate that we have freed ourselves. And I use that term because the what is called the 94th or the 95th, whatever the division that came out of the North, the black troops fighting in the federal government, they had more than 200,000 members. But the black folks who left the plantations and joined as concubines, the Union force in the South was more than 1 million. So that's our war of liberation. We fought that war. If you don't believe we fought, look at the battles. Look at Fort Pillow, when they massacred our women and children. But look how we came back at Fort Monroe, and the 94th took the 95th took the lead. They didn't have to. They'd been fighting for 2 days, no sleep. They said, no, this is vengeance for the killing of our people at Fort Pillow. And we took them and defeated the Confederacy at Fort Monroe. We need to understand and study our history. Sister Harriet Tubman, working with the military in the South. That was a black brigade. She took behind the enemy line and destroyed their supplies and ammunition and didn't lose a man. Well, we were doing that every day during the Civil War. It was our war of liberation. We fought more than 1 million men and women in that war to free ourselves. How dare anybody say we don't have the right to celebrate that? And that's what makes Juneteenth such a special day.
And Baba, I had read probably about a year ago. I've read that Pennsylvania made it a state holiday. I think they said it was Philadelphia who pushed for it, Baba, but Pennsylvania made it or declared it a state holiday. And I just recently read on Forbes.com that they're pushing to make Juneteenth a federal holiday.
It would be appropriate. It would, even though Emancipation Day and Jubilee Day was celebrated on the 1st, all of our people wasn't free yet.
Mm.
That was the day Lincoln signed it. And I forgot the name of the brother who put the call out. And people came from all the plantations in South Carolina and Beaufort area, Savannah area, and they came to this one plantation to celebrate on January 1st, 1863 in Beaufort, South Carolina. But we were still not free yet. When the Emancipation was passed and they celebrated that Jubilee Day, remember the Civil War is still going on, all right? And one of the reasons Lincoln passed that, because he said in the Emancipation Proclamation only freed the incarcerated Africans in the so-called slave states and in the border states. There were still enslaved people in Pennsylvania, parts of New York, New Jersey, parts of Delaware, okay? He didn't free them. He only freed the ones in the states that was in the rebellion against the Union and the border states, because he wanted to get rid of that labor force that was the backbone of the Confederate economy. You understand?
I understand.
Once those Black folks leave, the Confederacy just went into crash. So when you understand the role African Americans played in the Civil War, and when he passed the Emancipation, he also brought all these Black soldiers in, because it was at the point where they were about to lose this war. Where's Gettysburg? Pennsylvania, right?
Yes.
That's way up south, ain't it?
Yes,
Then
way up
the
north.
Confederacy is already about to surround your capital, aren't they? So you better do something like real quick, or your ass will be singing Dixie. Okay? So that's when we were introduced into the game. We were already the first South Carolina Volunteers. Before they created the brigade in Boston, we were already fighting with General Howard and later with General Sherman in the South. Okay, by the hundreds of thousands. And the way they delineated us from the federal troops, we wore red pants instead of blue pants. And we were barefooted because they didn't give us no boots. But that's cool, we fought anyway. So we need to just understand our story, learn our history. This was a civil war between them, but for us, it was a war of liberation.
Absolutely. And Bob,
they would not have wanted.
And Baba, let me bring up this point. You made it a point to explain why Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. So it wasn't about freeing us. It wasn't about, oh, we just want to free these Black folks. It wasn't a moral thing, basically. No. And I Baba, I learned.
If I could save this union without freeing one Black man, I'd do so.
Say it one more time, Baba.
Abraham Lincoln said, if I could save this union without freeing one Black man, I would do so. But he couldn't without doing that.
Yeah, so Baba, because a lot of people think that he was just this great white guy that it was a moral issue and he wanted to free the slave. And I learned, Baba, from reading Lerone Bennett's book, Forced into Glory. That's when I learned that it wasn't a moral issue for Abraham Lincoln. It wasn't a moral thing at all. It was political and economical.
Right. And he initially tried to get Mexico to let him resettle us there. Okay, after the Civil War. That's what his plans were, except he didn't live long enough to carry it out.
So he wanted to send the Black folks
get rid of us. He didn't want for us to stay here. But the key point is, though, we fought in that war. They don't even know the numbers. I dare to say over 1 million when you include the people in the South fighting with the federal armies and working with them to keep the supply line going, working with them as the labor to build the roads and the bridges and stuff. That's what Blacks who left the plantations were doing by the tens of thousands. And that was the bolstering of the Union Army in the Mississippi in the West and in the South. That was how Sherman and Howard was able to do what they were doing, as well as those who came from the North on a frontal assault. That was our war of liberation. We fought for our freedom. Nobody gave us a damn thing. And that's what makes Juneteenth so sweet when you think of it, because at the end of the day, they would not have won that war without us.
No, they definitely wouldn't have. And so, Baba, would it be safe to say that the Civil War wasn't about slavery, or it was in a sense? Because some people say it was about slavery. Some people say it wasn't about slavery.
It was all about slavery. The
Okay.
Civil War was fought because the economy of the South,
Mm-hmm.
one of the wealthiest aspects of the country, was dependent 100% on slavery.
Mm-hmm.
The economy of the North was dependent on slavery. Okay. What happened, there were certain elements in the North. The reason slavery lasted so long is because of the dependency of the northern states on the cotton and on the tobacco and on the other wealth that was coming out of the South.
Mm.
And so people don't realize many of those plantations in the South was owned by northern industrialists. They had people living there running it for them. Much of the cotton, the very railroad, the people who were responsible for cutting the deal with England to get the steel to build the railroad is the people who are the founders of the Chase Manhattan, J.P. Morgan Chase Bank.
Yes.
Okay. So these northern industrialists, that's how they were making their money. But what began to occur with the British moving into what is called the Industrial Revolution, which was created by enslaved African capital, had America now moving in that way. And the British had proven that wage slavery was cheaper than chattel slavery.
Mm.
Okay, wage slavers was the Irish who like to pretend they're white folks now, but they were the wage slavers of England. They were the Negroes, the big N people of England, okay? And so it was cheaper to pay somebody to get his own house, to get his own food, and take care of his own self, just show up at my damn job tomorrow, than it was to provide him with the house and provide him with the food and provide him with the medicine and all this. I'll give you enough money and you figure out how you're going to do all those things for yourself. So that's wage slavery was much cheaper than chattel slavery. And so that begins to involve in the North, as the industrialists trying to maximize their capital.
Mm.
Then the other piece was after Denmark Vesey and Nat Turner and Gabriel Prosser, those three, there were many more rebellions beside those, but those three were loomed to be so big, they were afraid of a takeover of the nation, of this, all the wealthy land in the South by Black folks. And the second fear was the Haitian Revolution, struck fear in the veins of these people. And they said, look, we don't want another Haiti in the United States of America. So the Haitian Revolution, the Nat Turner Rebellion, the Gabriel Prosser Rebellion, the other brother, I forgot, and the one down in New Orleans, they realized that in a flash, we can lose all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to change the way the system works. And that's what they did.
Yeah, and like you said, Baba, right after slavery, they brought in the sharecropping system.
Right.
They implemented vagrancy laws. They had convict leasing, so.
Right.
Yeah.
And the federal government abandoned us. That period they call Reconstruction was just a transition period. They had every intention of abandoning us. So people should read the Hayes Compromise. Okay. When Rutherford B. Hayes became the president of the United States after Johnson, who was the vice president of Abraham Lincoln, the North cut a deal. They told the Southerners, if you all vote to put our man in there, our business banker man, Rutherford B. Hayes, we'll give you the South back. And when they elected Hayes, they pulled the troops out of the South. Even though the brother, I could call him a brother in history, I guess, Ulysses Grant fought against it. He found his own government trying to destroy him for fighting to keep the troops in the South. Okay? It was a total betrayal by the Northern business interests, by the same liberals who like to take credit. So we fought to free y'all. No, you didn't. We fought to free ourselves.
That's
and
right, Baba.
You betrayed that freedom with the Hayes Compromise. When you, and people look at the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan was nothing but the Confederate Army with the white sheet and the cross on. These were the same soldiers that made up the Confederate Army, the same generals, the same colonels. And so now they become a state terrorist organization sanctioned by the Northern governments and business interests when they pull the federal troops out of the South. A total betrayal of Black Americans.
Mm.
And all this makes Juneteenth more significant because Juneteenth marks the day where we accept and declare our freedom, but it also marks the day when we see the process of betrayal by the federal government of the United States and the northern business, corporate, and banking structure of the United States.
Mm. And so, Baba, I did a little research on this. Wasn't there a general by the name of, I'm gonna pull him up really quickly, a Union Army general. His name was William T. Sherman.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, I was told that Sherman had met with a bunch of pastors at one point and asked them, what do you want after this? And the pastors said, we want land. I think they said that he met with 20 of them, 20, they said Negro leaders in literature to see what they want. And I heard that most of those people were, they were mostly ministers who were mostly Baptists and also Methodists. And they asked for land, Baba. Are you familiar with that? And if so, Baba, what happened?
Sherman went to the South, and Sherman had a scorched earth policy. He was just burning their capitals down. they hated that dude, right? And Sherman did agree. That's where the 40 acres and the mule thing came from. That was never a law. It was proposed as law, but it really came from the military. And in the field, the military have certain powers that they could use and discretions when it comes to contraband. So the land at that time and those plantations were contraband of war. They give it to who the hell they wanted to. And so they did give a few people 40 acres and a mule. But when that got rescinded by Johnson after Lincoln's death, and Johnson remembers the vice president, and he's from the South, and he pardons Robert E. Lee and all of the Southern generals and the leaders. And so, and he's the one that will negotiate removal of federal troops out of the South so that they can take control again and allow for Rutherford B. Hayes to be elected and come in. That's a betrayal that Black people really need to study and study it well, because that kind of betrayal we see constantly in between the so-called liberals and the so-called conservative. They're the same coin, just two flip sides of the same coin. So that 40 acres and a mule concept came from General Sherman. And there was another general, I don't know whether it's General Howard, it was another general that fought in the East Coast sector in the South. And you got to remember, a lot of the South was taken before the Civil War ended. I mean, South Carolina and those places, parts of Georgia, those were taken using Black troops who were, they had a name for them, but I know they had them wearing red pants to make a distinction, I guess, to let the enemy know who to shoot at first. But we always gotten betrayed by these people. But Black people always knew the value of land. We worked the land. Nobody knew the value of land like we did. We were the agronomists. We were the agriculturalists. We were the horticulturalists. We were the agricultural specialists. We knew the value of land. We ran the plantation. White folks maybe oversaw it, but we were the one weighing the cotton. We were the one picking the cotton, planting the cotton, checking the seed, checking the soil. That was Black people. We understood all of this. You know, I grew up in South Carolina, and I remember up in Burgess, I'd go to my family's at cotton fields. And I remember one of the big churches, which is still there, wooden church, is abandoned now, still sits in the middle of this cotton field, which is also abandoned land. I don't know where my cousins are in terms of it. People don't understand. Black folks, we never surrendered to slavery, ever. See, that's one of the myths, that we were just a happy slave singing and dancing. There were more rebellions in the United States of America than in all the Caribbean combined. And there's a number of books that's been written on rebellions in the United States by enslaved Africans. And that's not to put down the Caribbean. I'm just saying that They were smaller areas where they were majority blacks. We were a minority black in a majority white country that had decided to take the lead as being the mecca of the white world. There was another kind of tyranny here, another kind of terrorism and genocide here that others may not have experienced in the same way, especially the mental genocide, you know. And slavery in the United States didn't last as long as it did in the other islands. 1619, those people were brought over, they were all free within 20 years. They were indentured, they were not enslaved. You really don't get an appreciable slavery population in the United States of America until around 1670. So 1770 and 1865, you're talking a little less than 200 years. So this myth of 400 years of slavery in the United States, that never took place. Slavery in the United States is a little bit more, if you want to drop down a little bit to Boston, you're talking a little bit more than 200 years. And we're free. And all during that 200-year period, we are rebelling and we are resisting throughout.
And Bob, I'm glad that you made that point, because on social media, you see the youth, they're saying things like, I'm not my ancestors.
That's the most insulting thing. If you want to be anything, you should want to be your ancestor. Anyone that says, I'm not my ancestors, is ignorant of history. Is ignorant of history, have no understanding of history, and ancestors is just a word, because if your ancestors didn't get in the streets and kick ass, you wouldn't have been out there to yell the other day. You didn't do half in the 3 weeks you've been out there yelling than your ancestors did. I don't like to raise the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but if I just took that one day event, y'all didn't go up against nothing like that. You know, when John Lewis led that group, Dr. King wasn't there on the first march when the cops attacked them. And the police on the horsebacks and the Klansmen in uniform and the sheriff department, they knew they were going to get beat down. And Lewis decided, we're going forward anyway, you know. And they were brutally crushed and injured. There were no black mayor, no black chief of police, none of that stuff there to stop any of that. Those people who had to operate in that Southern theater had to live in tyranny. You think you live in terror now of the police? You had to live in tyranny every day. You know, not just when you went out of your house, but in your house, because the house may be nothing but a pile of ash the next morning if you're participating in the movement. They have no clue the price their ancestors have paid for them to even be in the colleges that they were home from when they went out there to protest on the street. And for the others who have had come out of the difficult economic situation, the house that you call a project and treat like crap came about because your ancestors fought to get some semblance of decent housing in urban America. And project wasn't a negative word. It just meant this is a government project rather than a civilian project. That's all the word meant. We turned the word project into a negative thing. Those were some of the finest built housing in the Black community. And it was built for the Black working class and the Black civil servant class. But as they began to achieve and get money and move out into the suburbs and others, it became the space for the Black working and underclass. And when the drug attacks came against our communities, it came against us in those very densely populated area that was not being policed well, because the police in most times was in league with the drug dealers themselves. But let's come back to our beloved Juneteenth. Every people should celebrate themselves. Dr. Ben taught us that true power is when you learn to deify yourself and your history. When you learn to deify yourself and your history, that's true power. Juneteenth is a step in the deification of African American people's history, okay? We could still use January 1st as also a day to deify African American history. We should all celebrate Nat Turner's birthday, Harriet Tubman's birthday, Denmark Bessie's birthday, Gabriel Prussen's birthday, And I could tell you about one brother, you don't even know, but I love him. And his name was Forrest Joe.
Hmm.
Forrest Joe was a guerrilla fighter who lived in those woods in the 1800s, early 1800s, late 1700s, up and down the Sanford River from Georgetown, South Carolina, up to Columbia, South Carolina, freeing thousands of his people. All right. He got caught when he was betrayed by a Negro, who that's the person, for the things he needed that he could like salt and other things. This is the contact that would bring him in. And he took a certain amount of money to trap Forrest Joe because he had killed the white plantation owner when he rustled some cattle to feed his people in the woods. You know what I'm saying? But who knows about Forrest Joe? But there were many Forrest Joes. You understand? We need to learn those stories. That becomes our folklore, our glorious folklore of our glorious heroes that we don't even know the numbers, When we think of the Seminole Nation, there's no such thing as Seminole Indians, right? Seminole is the Anglo-American mispronunciation of Cimarron, which is a Spanish word for runaway.
Mm.
And the runaways, who the Spanish call the Cimarrons, were the runaways Africans from Georgia, North and South Carolina that made it to Florida into Spanish territory. Okay, and the people we call the Indians were the Red-tailed Creeks. There was the larger Creek nation who sided with the slave owners, but a minor Creek nation called the Red-tailed Creek sided with the runaway Africans. Those two groups amalgamated to form the nation they call the Seminoles. Hmm. Okay, and that is the same people who marched in the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma and end up building Black Wall Street. Hey, get history together. It should have made sense, right? Some of them broke off and went to Mexico and fought in the Mexican War against the Spanish and the French. And then came back to Oklahoma for a while, but didn't stay there and moved back to Mexico, where they built an all-Black town in Mexico that's still there till this day. There's millions of African Mexicanos till this day. Mm. So history erases the mystery. If you knew your history, you would have nothing but devotion for your ancestry.
Mm-hmm. And Baba, this is my last question, because I know that we're running out of time. How do you feel about African Americans partaking in European holidays? I know that there's a book on the market entitled European Holidays, African Menticide by Shaka Musa Barashango. And so, and so he criticized, he criticized that, Baba. He said that we should not be partaking in holidays that do not celebrate our history, our culture, our heroes, and our sheroes. So what are your thoughts on that, Baba?
I may not have been as extreme as Baba Barashango. I was with him when he was writing that book. We used to talk. Matter of fact, that speech I did on Judaism, Christianity, Islam, when I got the locks, I'm at Barashango's place in Philly doing that speech. Baba was on it. He was one of my teachers as well as my friend and my comrade. But we have our holiday. A holiday, remember, that means holy
day. That's right.
It's a day that's sacred to that people. Okay. Things like New Year's, if I see no problem in celebrating the New Year, if in this hemisphere, indeed January 1 represents that. I don't know if what do you call it? People that look at the stars would calculate that. But Labor Day, nah. 4th of July, nah. Memorial Day, yes, because we created that.
We created that, right.
Okay. Mother's Day, that's universal, yes, and Father's Day is universal. The rest of it is their crap.
Yeah, Thanksgiving and Christmas and all of that stuff.
Thanksgiving, I used to celebrate it, me and a young brother and brother D at City College, and we used to celebrate what we call, I'm getting old.
You're not getting old, Baba.
It was the fighting spirit of the Native Americans. So that's what we call the day, the fighting spirit of the Native Americans. And we would celebrate them. But even that was a misnomer because in our ignorance, we didn't realize that the Native Americans was Black like us too. and we amalgamated to a great degree with our Asiatic brothers to form the Red Man. But that was a yellow man and a black man that formed the Red Man. Another whole story, another whole show. But no, I agree with Barashango, because we have our own holidays, and we should create a holiday for each month, because we have that much critical, significant, holy things that has happened. And as far as the New Year is concerned, the oldest New Year in the world is celebrated in Ethiopia on the 11th of September every year. We need to adopt that as our New Year's. It's the oldest known New Year celebration in the world, 11th September.
In Ethiopia.
Yes.
All right, Baba. So, Baba, thank you so much.
Juneteenth, happy Juneteenth.
Yes.
Let's celebrate our ancestors, because they didn't just get that word from Granger. They decided to celebrate this day themselves in '66. And I think it was a Texas town that legalized it way back in the day. I have to look at that history again. And so Juneteenth has been celebrated consistently since 1866. Though it was limited to Texas for quite a few decades, it expanded out of Texas now, and it's across our country. It's when the last of our people was free. So let's call that our Emancipation Day, our Freedom Day, our Jubilee Day.
Absolutely. And Baba, I just want to read something really quickly. There's a sister that sent this to me a while ago. She created a beautiful presentation about Juneteenth. And so one of the slides is entitled, "Why is Juneteenth Celebrated?" And so I just want to read it really quickly. But she says, "It symbolizes the end of slavery. Juneteenth has come to symbolize for many African Americans what the 4th of July symbolizes for all Americans, freedom. It serves as a historical milestone, reminding Americans of the triumph of the human spirit over the cruelty of slavery. It honors those African American ancestors who survived the inhumane institution of bondage, as well as demonstrating pride in the marvelous legacy of resistance and perseverance they left us." So with that said, family, happy Juneteenth. I hope you all enjoyed your day. Thank you so much, Professor James Small, for coming on.
You, Dr. Maat. I'm going to remember you.
Yeah, right, Baba. It's like, it's always a new experience when we get together. I'm like, Baba,
look,
you don't
look at my hands and look at your hands, Sal. Look at the lines in my hands real quick, Mom.
Let me see.
Look at the ones in yours. Look at the ones in mine. Can you see it?
Yes, I see it, Baba. I see it, Baba.
We got a lot of kinship going on. You might be my cousin, Chuck.
I hear you, Baba. But it should be a new experience.
Happy Juneteenth to the African world.
Yes.
We have the right, and we deserve the right to celebrate this moment in time.
Absolutely. Thank you for tuning in, family. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. Hit the subscribe tab, click the notification bell so that anytime I go live, you will be notified, or whenever I throw up a video, you will be notified. Also, follow me on Facebook, Dr. Maat. Professor James Small, where can they find you?
C Small 1926 at AOL.com.
Okay.
C, the letter C for Carol, Small, SMALL, 1926 at AOL.com.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Baba, again for coming on. Happy Juneteenth, family. Peace, peace, and Black power.